Hey, Mike. Welcome to the
Hey,
podcast.
good to
thanks
see
for
you.
thanks for
Yeah,
coming.
thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, no, it's I have to tell the backstory to the listeners.
Sure, sure.
We had planned on doing a podcast
Yep,
over a year ago
I
now,
know.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
literally, we scheduled it
Uh huh.
right at the brink of the pandemic.
Yep.
And I remember you messaging me back like, "Hey, like I don't know if it's a good time to be face to face."
I
You
know.
know, I was like, "Oh yeah, I totally agree. I totally
Yep.
understand." So we said, "Hey, we'll get back to it once it kind of blows over."
Yeah.
I think at the time, I don't know about you. At the time, I thought that would be like a few months.
Same, same. I was like, I knew it was kind of bad, but I
Yeah.
didn't realize like,
Yeah, and
yeah, it's
then
gonna be this
it
long.
was over a year.
Yeah.
And no, to be honest, I did kind of forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
But you were on Blair Kim's podcast, the
Yep.
When I Grew Up podcast,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh yeah, like that's a conversation I've been wanting to have for so long, and
For
then
sure.
I reached back out, and yeah, we were able to schedule this.
Yeah.
So,
So
thanks
good.
for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
This is awesome. It's great to be here.
Yeah, yeah. So, when we first talked about the initial podcast we were gonna schedule
Yeah.
before the pandemic, the reason why I reached out to you back then is because even from then, like a few years before that, I remember randomly us like having this time together. It was someone's baby shower, and I didn't have kids at the time, but I
Yeah.
was babysitting for someone else who was attending the baby shower.
Right.
And you were watching your kids while your wife was attending the baby shower,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And so we were at Duluth Town Center,
Town, yeah.
the park. We're just kind of like walking around.
Yeah.
And I remember you talking to me about, I don't know how we got into the subject, but you started talking to me about like financial literacy and like
Right.
financial freedom.
Yeah.
And I thought there were parts of that conversation I still remember because it was so different for me to hear that, especially, I mean, you talked a little bit about it on Blair's podcast.
Yeah.
And we talked about how as second generation Asian Americans,
Right.
we don't hear much of this from our parents.
We don't. We
Yeah.
don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just start from the beginning. Can you kind
Yeah.
of talk to us about how you first kind of got into becoming financially literate?
Sure. So, how far back do you want me to go? Because I can go like all the way to childhood. You know what I
Let's
mean?
go all the way to the childhood.
Yeah. So I grew up. I'm a little, I guess, different than most Asian Americans my age. My parents actually, they each left Korea as single adults, and they met in Ohio. So they kind of had the mindset, I've got to figure out this new country by myself. And so my mom came for education reasons. Like she had a doctorate, PhD from Ohio State, and they paid for her to learn there. So she's really book smart. My dad kind of came like no degree, but he's kind of like street smart. And so they just kind of figured out life as individuals. And then I think their mindset was, let's figure out this American culture as a single adult. And then they met. And so I grew up with my parents kind of in the corporate world. So my dad had corporate type of jobs where he worked at like Nestle. He worked in the World Trade Center for a little bit. And then he ended up working
wow.
IT for Mercedes-Benz. And my mom, she was like a cancer research scientist.
Oh,
And
wow.
so she got paid by like government grants. So not a lot of money, but it was like she was doing what she loved to do. And so we grew up, I would say not like super wealthy, but we grew up like not having like the day-to-day struggle, but we also had that survival mentality. Like we were told no a lot as kids, like me and my brother. Like when we wanted toys or when we wanted stuff, like it was always, no, we don't have the money, because I think my parents were trying to build on something, you know? So
Right.
they weren't, not to stereotype, but they weren't the typical like business owners that were like, you know, the like my wife, she grew up kind of like in the shop, like with her parents, as their parents were running the shop.
Right.
And
right.
so my parents, they kind of had that 9-to-5 job. But there was like, I think I had some decent money lessons growing up, but it was never like intentionally like talked about. And so when I kind of fast forward to college and graduation of college, I kind of did like the normal American thing, you know, where I went to school, pulled out loans to pay for school, and then got a job and bought my first car and had like car payments. And I remember thinking, this is when I was like 22. I was like, man, I just finished graduating from college. I have this college degree. It's a piece of paper, which is great, but financially I was worth negative dollars. And so I was like, man, this is weird. Did I just get scammed? Like, am I just going to go down this weird path of, negative financial net worth? And so, so there's something like, I think in all of our backstories, like as we think through our childhood, there's like different reasons why money has a certain meaning to us as adults. And so for me, it was more like security, or like remembering the things I couldn't get as a kid and like wanting them, but then also feeling like, man, I can't get them yet. Even though I have a job and I'm making money, I still have to pay back all this stuff. And so that feeling wasn't so good. And so that's kind of like the kind of the backstory of my journey with finances. Yeah. But really what intersected, kind of put me on the path of financial literacy was, there's actually a couple things. One is I took some financial courses in college, but it was all like corporate finance. Like, what are the companies doing? Like, what are like the complicated stuff? And I was like, I don't understand how to apply this to my own life. Right. And so what am I going to do with this information? But then I took a personal finance course in college that was just like, hey, if you make this much money coming out of college, do you know where all that money is going to go? And so like we did like a budget and stuff. So that class kind of helped me learn a little bit. But really what inspired this whole journey was meeting my wife, or she was my fiance at the time, and thinking, we're going to have this wedding. We're planning on a wedding, and this is going to sound really like mean or selfish, but it was like how we were thinking through things. We've been to enough weddings by that point, or I had been to enough, and we saw like enough Facebook photos of friends' weddings where they all just kind of look the same. Yeah. And so we were like, we want a different wedding, but we don't want our parents to have much say in who gets invited to our wedding. But the only way to make that happen was if we paid for the wedding ourselves. Right. And so we set out to go, let's try to just save up money and pay for whatever wedding we could afford. And so
that's one interesting thing about the Asian culture. It's that push and pull of, is it our wedding or is it for our parents? Right. Because like even with the wedding that Shirley and I had, we had very little say. Our parents were really cool in that they let us kind of do what we wanted. Yeah. But the people who were gonna come wasn't entirely up to us. Yeah. They're like, you gotta invite this person, this person, this person. Right. And then like before you know it, we're like, okay, the venue that we wanted to go to is not big enough to accommodate. Yeah. So yeah, that's what we didn't want. So what's funny is we actually got married in downtown Duluth, like outside. And so our wedding was more of like a picnic style wedding. We had banh mi sandwiches as the meal. We had bottled water and sun chips and like flavor ice. That was what we could afford for the people we wanted to invite. And so, but that journey, like we kind of had a goal of, let's save up $10,000 at the time, and it was doable. We're both working, and like, we're not really, she was living at her mom's place. I was living at my parents', so we weren't paying rent. And so, we made it work with that budget. And then had some left over to go on a honeymoon. And so, so that kind of got us talking about money. And then my brother, as a wedding gift, he gave us Dave Ramsey's financial, it was the Total Money Makeover. He said, hey, I heard this is a good book. It might help you guys with your money. And I saw the book and I read it in like a couple of hours. Like I flipped through it really fast. Oh, wow. Because I thought it was like super simple and it was a scam. Like I was like, this guy does not know what he's talking about. Because I was looking for like the complicated stuff that I learned in college, and I had just come back. I spent a couple years overseas, and I was like, I want to be like this international business icon, and how's this book going to help me get there? And so I looked at it, I was like, oh, this is nice, whatever. And then like I just put it to the side, and then this is me just kind of like thinking more of myself than I actually was. And then so then we get married, and then we had just
a friend of a friend reach out to us and meet with us to talk about like life insurance stuff. And he asked like amazing questions that we had never sat down and like talked about. And then as we researched life insurance on the internet, like Dave Ramsey's name came up again. I was like, hey, I remember this guy. And like the article he wrote, like it made a lot of sense. And so then I was like, wait, let me try reading his book again. And I think I was kind of growing in my faith at the time. And so he kind of looks at money through a spiritual lens and like just a biblical lens. And so the second time I read it, Gene and I, we bought a second copy so that we could read this book together. Like every night, it was like our nightly Devo. You know, we would just like kind of read it and talk about the concepts. But we were like, let's actually apply this in our lives and see where it takes us. And so that was kind of it was a long story, but it was basically the second reading of Dave Ramsey's book. When I was ready to receive it, that's what kind of like really pushed us onto this journey of financial freedom.
Wow. Hey, sorry, going back to the life insurance thing.
Yeah.
Is that like term life insurance where the
That's what Dave Ramsey recommends for most people.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And I'm sure like there are situations where like other kinds of life insurance make sense, but for the most part, like a newly married couple, you know, we ended up getting term life because through our research, we were like, at some point, life insurance is only there to ensure if you pass away, you have something to leave behind. But at some point, you want to build enough wealth to be self-insured. Yeah. And so you don't need like the other complicated life insurances that are offered.
Right. So term, correct me if I'm wrong, because me and Shirley actually sat through one of those too. Yeah. And we have insurance through that. Yeah. But it's basically you're putting money into an account. Yeah. And over time, through interest, the amount of money grows. And then like the payment for the life insurance comes out. Like if you have it for long enough, the payment for the life insurance comes out from the interest, right? So you're like growing that money over time. And it's kind of like a savings account / life insurance type thing, right?
No.
Okay.
No. So I don't want to like, I don't know if like I don't know enough about the insurance to have this like detailed conversation, but what you described was like cash value life insurance where the cash is building up, but term is different. It's like your car insurance. You just kind of pay a little bit to make sure you have insurance, but you're not trying to like keep some of that money that you paid every month for car insurance. You know? And so that's what we're doing with our life insurance. We're just paying a little bit just in case, you know, the big thing happens, like one of us passes away. But if we don't pass away, then we're not trying to save that money anywhere else. I see. The investments happen separately. And so that's where like, that's kind of the approach we learned about. And, yeah.
So okay, sorry. No, because I have the other one. Yeah. And I mean, for us, it's just, I think I don't really think about money that much. Right. So like Shirley's really good with it. She's like the budgeter and she's in charge of all the finances in our house. Yeah. But for me, I just need something where money just comes out of my account and gets stored somewhere. Yeah. That I'm not thinking about, so that like it like grows. Yeah. So that's why But then when I was when I sat down with the person to talk about that, some of the interesting questions that came to me were like simple things like how much coffee do you buy? Right. Like a week, and then like can you like calculate out how much that actually amounts to in a month? It's like surprisingly a lot. And then like you add on things like do you have a gym membership that you don't use, and like little things. Were subscriptions?
No, it was the bigger life questions like if you pass away, what's gonna happen to Jean? You know, I was like, I don't know. And like, how much do you think she's gonna need to be okay? And I was like, I don't know. Like, is she gonna work after you die? I'm like, I don't know. So then I just was like, kind of bigger life questions that we came up with. But those examples are definitely key. Like the subscription, all the monthly things you're paying. Like if you extrapolate them out to like 30 years and you do the interest rate, like how much you could be, you know, investing with that instead. So, but yeah, so maybe we talk about life insurance like offline because there are like people who really do believe in the cash value life insurance, but then there's a lot of people that like don't and like have like arguments. So it can be like either, I can see it going either way. But what we decided to do was just kind of keep our investments separate from our insurance.
Gotcha. Oh,
Yeah.
that makes sense too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So
Sorry. And then,
yeah.
So,
then upon reading Dave Ramsey's book, again, like we're each kind of like going through this like personal, spiritual journey of like growing in our faith, taking our faith from our like head to our heart to our hands, like actually making it apply and change our lives and see what happens when we follow what we're hearing and like do the things that we're hearing in church. And so so we were like, do you know about the Dave Ramsey baby steps?
So explain them to me.
Okay. It's real simple. There's 7 steps, but it's like you look at the 7 steps as if somebody just gave you a whole bucket of money, you just go through them in order. You finish step 1, then you move on to step 2, then you move. So it's like, it kind of gives you a money plan for your life, no matter how much money. If you got $1 and you're on step 2, then just put that $1 on step 2. But if you got like $1 million, then you just finish step 2, and then with whatever's left, move on to step 3. And then like, it kind of gave me that roadmap of like, oh, like how do I handle money at this level, but also at many other levels if I were to come upon that much. And so so that kind of gave us a roadmap for what we're going to do. But
is that like one of the early steps is like to pay off all debt and things like that? Gotcha.
All that stuff. So step 1 was like save $1,000 just in a baby emergency fund. Step 2 is the debt snowball, paying off all your debt except for your mortgage, but you list them from lowest to highest in terms of balance, and you just attack the lowest one. So it's the debt snowball. And then step 3 is fully funded emergency fund. Step 4, 5, and 6 kind of happen concurrently, but in that order. So it's you do your personal retirement investing, and then you do kids' college, and then you pay off the house. And then step 7 is like you build a bunch of wealth and like give a bunch of it away, at some point. So those 7 steps kind of give a good framework, because it's most of the time how we approach money is like whatever we learn from home or like what we see our friends doing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it helps, but most of the time it doesn't really get you where you want to go.
Because like for me in my house, kind of the exposure to finance that I had, like growing up, my parents, like they were well off. We were comfortable. Like we never had any struggles. My dad was like a small business owner. Like he liked the import business. But I remember having a conversation with him where he convinced me having debt was a good thing. And that's what I carried throughout my life. But what I didn't realize though was that he was talking from the perspective of a business. Why, like a business, it makes sense. It's okay for a business to have a certain amount of debt because there's like cash flow, and like he explained it all to me. But literally, what I took from it was, oh, that's not a bad thing.
Right.
Yeah, like I remember in college, my parents just gave me a credit card, and I was like, oh, my credit limit is the amount of money that I have. Yeah, like that was my mentality.
Right.
Yeah,
I know, and like that. Similar for me, like I opened my first credit card in college, like all those companies are on campus trying to sell you their products. And then, I was thinking I could beat the credit card system. Like I got a cashback card. It was the Amex Blue card at the time. And like when Gene and I first got married, like even though we saved the money to pay for our wedding, I wasn't really like living this debt-free life. And so I was like, hey, this is your credit card now. Like we have one of our own, so let's put everything on this card because we're gonna save 5% on like at the end of the month or whatever. Yeah. So that's what I was doing. But through this whole journey, and there are people who can like beat the credit card game. Like they're very diligent. They earn their points and they do it well. But I kind of thought through like, what story do I want to tell about my credit card usage, and what do I want to teach my kids? Like, do I want to have to explain credit card points to them when we're talking about money and like interest rates, or do I want to explain, hey, you can save your money and then spend the money you saved, and if you want something, you save more and spend that money, and just you get to buy what you can afford. Yeah. And that to me seemed like the better lesson that I am currently teaching my kids.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. Because I remembered another thing in high school. I remember it was my AP, for whatever reason, my AP US history teacher was telling us how if you have a credit card, why would you spend your own money? Like when you can spend someone else's money.
Right.
And so like there was something about the culture like growing up where like so many different people were trying to convince us that credit card debt is not a bad thing. I remember like a lot of the people saying, I don't know, this might be true. I think there's some truth to this, but people were like, you need to build credit card debt to like build your credit score.
Right.
Yeah, so there's all these things, all these reasons that kind of, because intuitively debt is a bad thing, right? Just the word debt means that you owe someone something, and that's a negative thing.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the way, at least for me personally, like there was this lesson of debt is okay.
Right. Or you need it to survive in this society. You know? And so that could be true if your plan is to borrow more money and pay it back so you can borrow more money and pay that back. Then your credit score will matter. But there's another path that you can take, and that's the path that we were hesitant to take because we didn't see anybody taking this path of like the debt-free life. But we're like, I think that's the path. But we were looking around like, who else is doing this? And it was hard to find people. But we were like, let's just try this debt-free life. And so, in his book, Dave Ramsey's book, one of the stories was about a young married couple who they decided to live in like the apartment garage of some old lady. And so they saved up, they were both working. And so they saved up one of their salaries for like 3 or 4 years, and they paid for their first house in cash.
Wow.
And when we read that, we were just like, wait a minute, like we currently live in an apartment and our rent is pretty cheap relative to like a house payment. And so what if we just stayed here for as long as it took until we can do that, you know, like save up cash and buy a house. And so that was kind of like the big hairy goal. But we also were like, nobody else is doing this. Like, is this okay to do? Like, are we crazy for doing this? And so, but we just decided like, let's go for it. Let's see. The worst thing that can happen is we have a bunch of money and then we can't pay for the whole house, but we still have like no debt and a ton of money. And so, I'll give some numbers. So we set out $200,000 as like our house payment goal. And this was we decided this around 2010. And so, or maybe 2009, but it was like, that was a number that seemed like for that amount of money at that time in the area we live, we can buy a house that would be like, it would meet our needs, you know? And so, but so this is where my story and Gene's story is a little different. Like I did have the experience of having debt, like the car payment, the student loans and the credit card payments, and like feeling like a slave to the lender. Like the Bible says, the borrower is slave to the lender. And so, I remember feeling like, oh, I gotta get this debt out of my life at some point. But I didn't realize how much of a drag it was. And so I was toying around with it. Like I would pay some of it back, get to zero, but then like immediately go buy something else, like a new car, and get more debt. Whereas as Gene was like, she never had debt growing up, but she's the spender. And so whatever she got in her paycheck, she would try to spend it all. And so she lived paycheck to paycheck out of like her own choice. And so when we set this house goal, we were like, let's look at this as if this 200 grand, as if it's like this huge debt over our shoulders. And let's approach that with the mindset of baby step 2, like get rid of all of our debt. So let's go gazelle intense. Let's like, and Dave is so good at this. Like he'll rally people and get them like all fired up to go crazy to pay off their debt. And so we were like, what if we took that mindset, but we had the security of knowing we don't have debt, but we still went crazy to like get to that number as fast as possible. So for us, that meant, even though we didn't have to, that meant like making a lot of different sacrifices, like what we bought, what we ate, and like the kinds of things we did. And so you had mentioned earlier, like the peanut butter jelly sandwiches, like that was a big part of like our journey. Like there were times where
I don't know if I talked about it on the podcast or if it was before, but when we were walking around that park, it's still, I still remember it because
Yeah.
it shocked me, because you were like, yeah, there were days where we literally just ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches
Yeah.
to meet the
The
savings
budget.
goals.
Yeah. Or like each month we had like food money in cash, and we're like, well, we're running out of money, but all we had was peanut butter jelly, and like we would eat PBJs, and like we would go to bed hungry some nights. And we'd be like, oh my God, we have like 6 figures in the bank. But like, no, like we're not going to go out and buy dinner. We're just going to like go hungry tonight just to like meet this goal. And so it was a little crazy looking back. But again, we were just like, no kids. Like we can challenge ourselves in that regard. And so, but we, neither one of us cooked. So there were like different ways we saved on money. Like, and I still remember the prices we paid, but we would go to Costco to get like 2 pizzas and a drink, and that was $4.84. We would go, because so we'd save every single receipt. Like we'd buy stuff and save it. So then at the end of the month, we'd count like and go through like every dollar, every penny. And so as we're doing this monthly meeting, we kept hearing like $4.84, $4.84, or like damuji their gimbap $6.36,
Right.
$6.36. So like these numbers are just like common to me now, but like that was kind of what we did. And so
in doing that, so I want to get your approach clear, because something that me and my wife do is, like, we don't really have savings goals. Like we do things where like we've paid off our cars, and there's a part of us that are like, oh, both our cars are paid off, maybe we should trade it in, get a new car. But we're like, no, let's drive it as long as we can, because not having payments on cars is a huge deal.
It is so nice. Yeah.
But like we do things where we're like, okay, we're about to pay this much money for this meal or this thing, let's just cut back a little bit. I think it's extravagant. But that doesn't really help much. That only helps for those little transactions. But what I hear you saying is you guys had a budget. Like we're only allowed to spend this much money on food for this month. And then you just made sure that whatever you were eating that month,
we stayed within
that budget.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a good approach.
And so that was what it took back then. And so like, you know, anytime there's free food around, we'd be like, yo, free food, like that's gonna save us this money, you know. So but now, like, so I do think it's like a progression, and it's like a journey. We're not that tight anymore with our finances, like looking at every penny.
Right.
But we know if we had to be, we could get back to that. You know?
Yeah.
So now it's more like, it's a little more like, less like every month we have to like have a planned out budget. It's more just like general, like, hey, we're fine. Like we're still investing. We got our money's growing. And so now it's, I heard the term from a podcast called valuist, like somebody who doesn't mind spending money on things they value. And that's kind of like resonated with me, because I look at some of the things we own now, and like you said, like we have 2 used paid for minivans, but we don't really value cars that much. So we're not like trying to make those nice, you know?
Right.
But I do value like my time with my kids and like experiences. Yeah. And so I bought an electric bicycle, you know, that's probably cost more than my car, you know what I mean? But it's like, that now feels okay. It's in line because it's what I value in this season. Yeah. And I'm not having to borrow money to do it. So we paid cash. We have 2 electric bicycles, and we pull our kids around in a trailer. And that whole setup, I do think it costs more than our car, but it's like, that's what we value now. And like, that's creating great memories. And so
that's awesome.
Yeah. So things like that, like, I think it's nice to do that now, but we wouldn't have done that earlier in our journey. It was like, let's just get to that number first, you know?
Right. Yeah. And I want to say, like, as a father, like, I think, you know, we have different priorities, but like when I was in college, or right out of college, when I started my first job, there are things that I just bought kind of mindlessly. Yeah. Like I wouldn't say that I valued those things, but I just bought it just because I had the money. Yeah. And I think it really depends on the season of life, right? Like there are seasons where you are able to make more sacrifices. Right. And I think you should take advantage of that. Like if you're a younger listener who just started their career and, you know, you don't have that many things that you have to pay for, like take full advantage of that, you know, save as much as you can. Don't just, because I think like one of the things is like me growing up, like we used to be really into cars.
Yeah.
So it's like whoever had the coolest car was the coolest person.
For sure. Yeah.
You know, so it's like right out of college, we're like looking up used BMWs, like how
Yeah.
much do they cost? But
Yeah.
it's like, well, like how much do you actually value that car?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the questions I don't think I asked myself when I
Right.
should have.
Right.
But yeah, that's a really good thing to think about.
And it's hard to do because you're at that age, you're trying to like figure out who you are and like what matters to you, you
Yeah.
know? And I don't know, I just remember being like my young 20s and thinking like status mattered and like my possessions mattered.
Yeah.
But I think the older I'm getting, I'm like, okay, that some of that may matter sometimes, but most of the time, like it doesn't matter at all, you know? So for me and my kids, like we, you know, just having time to spend with them and doing fun stuff,
Yeah.
that matters because that leads to like fun conversations and deep conversations where I get to like kind of lead them in a way that I know their hearts, you know, and so that I hope is going to pay dividends in another season for me, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of what I don't know where to go from there, but
yeah.
So we ended up like meeting that goal. So it took about almost 4 years to hit that number.
So
Yeah.
was that the plan? Did you guys budget out? We're gonna meet the goal in 4 years, or was it you guys just had a budget and you guys tried to keep to it as best as you could?
Right. So we did not have like a full like end-to-end timeline, but we noticed certain opportunities, like we just went for it. So like if Jean could get extra hours at work, she would just take it, and like that would be more income. I was able to have my full-time job, and then another client asked me to do some side consulting. So we did like I did extra work, and so there were times where we'd be working a lot of hours, you know, where we didn't have to. And then, but then like it's not all like this perfectly linear path. And so there were times where it got really hard, like because Jean, it was hard for her to like, she's the spender. So for me, I got joy just seeing the savings go up. But for her, she's like, this is not fun at all. So we took like a spontaneous Disney cruise, you know, just to get that like out of our system, you know, so that set us back a little bit. But then I think a big part of like why that season mattered so much was because we had to make some tough choices like with our social lives. And so I think if we had to do it all over again, we would have done it a little bit differently because we were so intense with this journey. Like if our friends weren't along for the ride with us, we just, I don't know. I feel a little bad, but we were like, we just can't make the time for that right now. But I think in hindsight, we could have done a better job, like trying to rally them or like cast more vision and like maybe get more people on board with what we were doing. But on the flip side of that, because we didn't have like as many close peer friends, we still wanted to like do something with the extra time we had. And so we said yes to volunteering in student ministry. And that was a tough yes for us. Now it's like, man, that's a huge part of our lives now. But back then it was like Jean was a 7th grade science teacher. So the last thing she wanted to do with her free time was hang out with students, you know?
Yeah.
And like, I was like, no, but this is cool. Like you should meet these high school students and like, they're different. Like you can like actually talk to them and relate. So, so we said yes to leading at KCPC and being Bible study teachers, partly because we wanted something to do with our time, but also because we were like, well, these kids are in high school. They don't have a lot of money either, but they know how to have fun. And so we'll have fun like leading them and, you know, let's try it. And so that ended up being like one of the best decisions of our lives.
That's awesome. Let's get back to that. But I wanted to ask you about when you say like socially there was an impact, is it like your friends wanted to do something that cost X amount of money, but you guys weren't willing to pay that?
Yeah, it was always like going out to eat or going to bowl or do like stuff that always seemed to cost money, you know? But we were just like, man, it's fun and we can do it sometimes, but it can't be like the only time we're hanging out is like when we're spending money like that, you know, at that level, because we had different goals for ourselves. And so
it is weird. That is the culture that seems like whenever we hang out with people, there needs to be some sort of money spent.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, I wonder why we don't think about the alternative, like where we're just like, hey, let's just go to a park and just chill.
Right.
Like, we don't have to spend any money if you do that.
Right. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. And
Yeah.
sorry, another question, just to get really practical.
Yeah.
Because you said the way that you guys save the money is so you allotted certain amount of money to different buckets. Is that how it worked?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like X amount of money for utilities, X amount of money for food, X amount of money for clothes.
Yeah. So there's what Dave calls the envelope system. We use jars instead, so we can like see the cash, but it's basically the like food, and food is the big one. If you can control where your food spending is going, that's what you really have control over. And then things like we did cash for gas for a little. That was okay, but it was like we have to drive at some point, so it wasn't easy to control.
Yeah.
But clothes for sure was definitely one that we can control. And then entertainment, but entertainment a lot of times was eating out, so those were the categories that you have some control over as you're trying to spend cash. The other things like utilities, like those, you can't, I mean, it was harder to control.
They're more fixed.
Yeah, they're more fixed. And so in our apartment, we had a cash, and this was like part of like us being more like secure and trusting students. But we had students coming to our apartment all the time, and we just had like jars of cash on our counter.
Wow.
But they were labeled like food, entertainment, and gas or clothes, and so, but they knew like that was our plan, and they got to see us living our lives like and having some money in there, and sometimes no money in there. Yeah.
Wow. So I think you kind of answered it, but for someone who is interested in doing this, where would you tell them to focus their like attention on in terms of their spending to cut the most amount of unnecessary spending possible? Would it be food and entertainment?
Yeah, food and entertainment, and then like, but part of that is the like subscriptions, like all the like little knickknack things, which feel like needs but are really wants. Like, try to get them out of your life first. So like cable, like a cell phone, you probably need that, that nowadays is need, but like maybe your internet bill, I don't know, like it depends on how intense you want to get. But I mean,
like you can adjust the speed. I think people tend to go for the highest speed without really realizing how much is appropriate for them.
Right. So there's little things there, but I would say, if you're just starting out, like the bigger decisions you have to make up front are like, where are you going to live? Like your housing costs. Do you have to own a home, or can you like rent and buddy up or roommate with people? And your car, like housing and transportation, those are like even bigger than food, I think. Like if you can knock those out or have a good approach that kind of gets you what you need, but is not extravagant, then you can start to make some progress. But that's hard to do now, like rent prices are high. So it's like if all your whole paycheck is getting eaten up by like housing and transportation, then there's not a lot of wiggle room,
Right. But I do want to tell this to kind of the younger people who like started their careers. There's no shame in living with your parents if there's space there, right? I think especially for Asian Americans, like it's like kind of normal for us, but even if you're not Asian American, like why burn the money like just because you want to leave the house? Like just endure it for a few years and save that money. I remember there was a moment in my career where I rented out like this little studio apartment just to have my own place. Like my parents' house was more than big enough for us. Like the whole upstairs was basically my space. Like there was no reason for me to have done that, but I did that. And I broke my lease early because I realized how like much of just how much money I was just basically burning. And like breaking a lease isn't cheap.
Right. There's like
So I think like ultimately I ended up saving like 1 month or 1 or 2 months worth of rent because I cut it early. I cut it at 6 months, but then you have to pay like 2 months. So I ended up probably not getting my value's worth, but I think that experience it helped me going into like my marriage.
Right.
Because to actually see, and like my parents went through this, like my, with the 2008 recession, my dad had to close down his business and all that. So like knowing that there was no safety net of my parents' money and
Yeah.
just my money, like seeing it like moving up and down like that, I
Yeah.
think it was a big life lesson for me.
Yeah.
But like people, like there are, you guys listening, you guys don't have to even go through that. Just like there's no shame, nothing wrong with living with your parents.
Right.
Save up, especially in this housing market.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I did it like in 2000 when I came back from overseas. I just moved in with my parents for a little bit. My wife lived with her mom, like just starting out her career, and so definitely no shame in that. But if you are gonna move out, like I do think you do want to take a look at finding a roommate or something. That's what I did coming out of college. I rented it was a $700 a month like attic of a like a townhouse, but it was like it was kind of in the ghetto. Now that I look back, I'm like, I think I was like in the not so safe neighborhood. And this was like, it was just like kind of like a dump. Like literally the back window faced a dump of a restaurant. And so, but it was like, that's what I wanted to pay. I was like, I don't want to pay more than, so my share was like 400 or something. So
Wow.
like, and my roommate was 300, but yeah, those were the kinds of decisions that kind of like were ingrained in me from that college class. Like when I learned about like rent and car payments. So, but yeah, so if you're just starting out, it's like, take a look at housing and transportation first, and then look at food. So that's on the expense side, but then you also want to look at the income side. Like, how do I generate more income? Can I do a side hustle, or can I just take on more opportunities at work and increase my pay? And so, can I negotiate my salary? These are conversations that, sometimes we don't get trained on how to do as Asian Americans, but there's ways you can or can I find another opportunity with another company and get a pay bump? So that all is part of my journey as well. And so,
That one interesting thing, I've been wanting to talk about this on the podcast. This is a perfect opportunity to do so. You know how it's taboo to talk about your salary?
Yeah.
I think, what do you think about talking about your salary with your coworkers? Because I feel like that gives you so much leverage to negotiate your pay. At my work, I have no idea what all my coworkers get paid.
Right.
So they might be getting paid $10,000 more than me for doing the same job, and because I don't have that information, I can't negotiate my salary.
Right.
So I mean, I don't know what other people think, but I am a big proponent of normalize talking about your salary, at least with your coworkers who are doing the same work, so that you guys can give each other information, so that you can negotiate better.
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, it's a matter of trust too, because that's like kind of like you got to build alliances if you're gonna have those conversations.
True, yeah.
So I think I think it's a good idea, and I think it's something that I think as you go up in certain levels of leadership, you're gonna know more of this information, and then but at some point, and this is like an evolution, but at some point, like the salary growth stops becoming a motivator. Like you look for like other things that are great about your job, and you make sure you keep those things. And so especially if you're making more than you need, more money is not going to motivate or like help much. So it's like, do I have my autonomy? Can I like work on things that I want to work on and say no to everything else? And so those types of things, like they matter, like as you progress, I think in your career. But
you work from home as well, right?
I work from home. Yeah.
That was a big motivating factor for me.
Yeah.
Like just the fact that I'm able to work from home changed my life.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing. Like if I were to ever leave my company, it would have to be to a place that let me work from home as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then like think about the things like how much PTO you're getting, or like the projects you're working on, the people you're working with. Like if the more say you get in that, then the salary, as long as you're getting enough, you're like, that's fine. I make that much, but my job is really fun, or like it gives me a sense of purpose, and then I get to be with my family, at the end of the day. So
something, this was an article, it was several years ago, so I don't know if it still stands true, but the article, it was really interesting because it said that for a family of four, a household of four,
Yeah.
if the family income is $75,000,
Right.
anything above that is minimal, like
The marginal increase. Yeah.
yeah,
The
marginal
benefit, yeah.
increase in like happiness.
Yeah.
So like, if you're making $75,000 in a household of four,
Yeah.
then like making more money is gonna be really like it's the return of happiness is
Yeah.
gonna be very minimal.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
I think so too. Yeah.
But like, yeah, I mean, I think about like my career progression, like when
Yeah.
I probably make double what I started to make way back in the day.
Yeah.
But like, I think about like happiness. I mean,
Yeah.
the happiest moments were like when I got married, when I had my kid. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't when I got my raises. Or
Right,
like,
right.
Yeah. I mean, there was certain amount of freedom that came
Yeah.
with it, but then now it's just like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's such good perspective because I remember like thinking I came out of college. I'll give some numbers, but like most of my friends were engineers and they were making like 50, 60, 70,000 a year, like just coming out of college. And I was making under 40. I was like, dang it. Like, I'm like, I feel like I'm behind, you know, but we talked about salaries with those friends, you know, that you're friends with in college. And then I remember thinking, man, if I could just make like $45,000 or $50,000, like I'd be set for life, you know?
Right.
But I think there's something in that, me repeating that to myself and like framing that as my like okay baseline, that it helps me to this point because I still think that like right now, like as long as we can make about $40,000 and like have health insurance, we're fine. Like we got like, especially with no mortgage and no car payments, that money can go a really long way. Like, and so yeah, like you said, like you make a lot more than you started at that age, but now I'm like my baseline is like, can this job pay me like $40,000 a year? All right, then maybe I can do it, you know?
See,
so
and I think that's great. Having that, if you don't have that baseline, then your like satisfactory level moves with your salary.
Yeah, it's
like,
a moving target. Yep.
Yeah. So like unless you have that baseline, like I think that having that baseline is gonna help you so much more in like savings and stuff like that.
Right.
But like I honestly I didn't really have a baseline. I do now.
Yeah.
But I didn't before, and it was just like, oh, whenever I got a raise, I was like, okay, then I can afford to buy this much more stuff.
Right.
So like it just, I wasn't saving more money. I was just spending more money.
Yeah.
And like it's much easier to spend more money than to suddenly have to spend less money.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, having that baseline, that's such a important thing.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask about the investment side of things. So you said the steps were save $1,000 like emergency fund.
It's like just a starter emergency fund. Like before you try to pay off debt, you just need a little bit of cash on the side just in case some like random emergency happens, car tires or something, you know, like so just have $1,000 in cash. Some people like when we did it, we had like $2,000. So nothing huge, like not like $5,000-$10,000, just like enough to cover the little emergencies, but something not so much that and not so much that it's going to stop you from moving on to the next step.
Right. And so, then the next step is to pay off debt, starting with the smallest.
Yeah.
And then you said the mortgage isn't included in that, right?
Right. So like credit cards, car payments, hospital bills, student loans, those all go in that second step. And this is where there's some debate, you know, do you do lowest balance first or do you do highest interest rate first?
Oh, right.
You know, because like mathematically you want to pay off the highest interest rate, but I think the Dave Ramsey approach is like if we were just doing math, you wouldn't be in this financial position anyway. So like stop trying to math your way out of it. Like follow the steps. Like the behavior is what matters most. So like if you can knock off that little debt, then you start to build momentum and like that'll override the math in terms of like your actual behaviors.
And I think there's a psychological backing to that. Like when you check off something on a to-do list, there's like a release of dopamine that makes you feel good.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's like the same concept. When you pay off a credit card,
right?
Like there's that check.
Yeah.
And then you're like, it feels good to do that. So like it gives you more momentum to go forward.
Yeah.
So I can see that. Yeah.
Yep. And so while you're doing that, you're paying minimum balances on everything, but then any extra money, you're attacking that smallest balance.
one.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so that's where like I just picture the bucket of money all the time. Like, okay, just line it up in order and like wherever that bucket, whatever you have in your bucket, start putting it at the next thing on that list. And so once you get to baby step 2 and you knock out all your debt, then the next thing in the line is baby step 3, where you, by this point, you should pretty much know like how much it costs per month to keep your life going the way it is, you know? And so you want to multiply that by 3 or 6. So it's like 3 months of expenses to 6 months of expenses. That's going to be your like fully funded emergency fund.
Oh, I see.
So maybe, you know, if your life costs $2,000 a month, then you want like $6,000 to $12,000, somewhere in that range. And that's your emergency fund. And that's like in a money market account, nothing fancy. You're not trying to earn money on that. You just have a bunch of cash in the bank for emergencies. And so if you picture your life at that point, you have no more monthly payments. Maybe you have a house payment, and you have about like $10,000 to $15,000 in the bank. That starts to give you like this sense of peace. Like, if I really wanted to like try something, I could go do it, you know, like, or if I got fired today, I'd be okay, you know, like, and so you start to, it kind of clears your mind to make different kinds of decisions. So, yeah.
So then after that, because you mentioned like investment accounts and things like that.
Yeah.
And like for someone who knows absolutely nothing about finance, like what would you give as kind of the beginner advice of how to start like investing?
Right. So is this someone who has a job or no job?
Someone who has let's say it's someone who has a job and is at like, you know, that baby step number 3-ish. So like he's starting to have free money. Yeah.
So if you have a job, like you want to ask your company if they have something called a 401k. That's if you work at like a private company, or if you work at like a nonprofit or government, ask if they have a 403b. But that's basically money, or it's a way you can set aside money and invest it for the future. And so it has tax advantages. And so and what a lot of companies do, they'll match your money. So like, let's say if the company says we have a 3% match, that means 3% of your salary, like they'll give you that money as long as you commit that same amount of money.
Right.
And so I would say, you know, your first thing is start asking about your 401k or 403b, and then start contributing to the match at least, you know, because you're going to get that same amount of money from your company as extra. It's like a raise, or it's like a bonus. It's like free money.
Right.
And so, but it's not enough to just like say I have a 401k or I have 403. Like within that, there's going to be choices of what you invest your money in. And so I think that's where having some understanding of like what those investments are is going to be important. And so the word that I look for is the word index, you know? And so the best way I can explain it, and I've talked to my nieces and nephew about this. If you picture, I'll talk about index funds for a second.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have like, let me think this through. So, what's a company that you like, you know, that's out there, like Nike, for example, you know, if you put all your money in Nike and then something happens and Nike tanks, your money's gone, you know? And so, but what if, same thing with Tesla, like if you think Tesla's awesome, you can put some money in Tesla, but what if some competitor comes out and just like blows them away, you know? So Tesla goes out of business, that money's gone. But what if there was a way you can start putting money in like every single US company in right now? And there's about 3,000 something of them, you know? If you can take $1 and just like spread it across all those companies, then if one of them goes out of business, you're okay, you know?
Like there's impact to that $1, but all the other dollars are fine.
Yeah. But I used to think, well, what if they all go out of business? You know, like I would think, because I'm more risk averse. Like I don't want to like risk my money. But then I heard it explained. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what's happening right now. So the stock market is naturally going to increase. And the reason is when you look at all 3,000 companies, the worst thing that can happen is these companies individually lose 100% of what they were. But when that happens, like another company comes into place, you know? So the downside is a company lost 100%, but the upside is unlimited. Like a company can grow 2, 3, 400, 5, like 1,000%. So every company out there is trying to grow. And so there's like unlimited upside. And yes, there is downside, but that downside is limited to 100% of of a company, whereas the upside is like infinite.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, as some companies do go out of business, new companies emerge, and they're all trying to grow, and they're all trying to. So it's like a self-cleansing process where the bad ones go away, and yeah, your money might go down sometimes, but the general force of the market is for these companies to grow. And so, and then another way to think about it is, now your $1 that you put into these 3,000 companies, everybody who works for these companies, they're waking up every day trying to do a good job at their work, and now they're trying to make you money,
Right.
you know? So like, you've now become an owner of like millions of people, like, in their work, you know,
Yeah.
myself included, because I'm doing the same thing.
Right.
So it's like this interesting thing. Like, when you look at an index fund, what the word index means is, it's just trying to like maintain that list of companies, or that set. So there's like something called the total stock market index fund, and it's just an index of all the US stocks. It's not trying to do better than anything. It's not trying to time anything. It's just, you get to own all the stocks.
Yeah.
And over time, that should grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good, because I think there is this level of like fear in the unknown.
Yeah.
And like, you hear news, like, so recently
Yep.
in Europe, they're doing like this soccer tournament, and Cristiano Ronaldo,
Coke, yeah.
he moved Coke, saying, "Oh, don't drink Coke, drink water."
Yeah.
And the share price of Coke fell, and Coke, I mean, I think they got back up, but Coke for a moment lost like $4 billion
Right.
in its value. So it's
Yeah.
like, you hear things like that, and you're like, oh, I don't want to invest in companies that can lose that much money. But you're right, with indexes, there's very low risk, and you can see steady growth.
Yeah.
And like all things, I guess we have to say, with all things, high risk, high reward, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are, like, if you want to make a lot of money really fast and you know what you're doing, you can invest in stock. But like, I don't think you should be doing that with your savings. That should be money you're willing to lose, right?
Right. So that's why, like, in baby step 4, it's like more, you're investing like for the long term. This is like 10, 20, 30 years out. So as long as you're doing some of that, then if you have extra money and you want to try like timing the market, or doing like GameStop, or like the meme stocks, you know, then you can do that.
Yeah.
But as long as you know, like, that money is not there, it's not there for the intent of your retirement, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but those are the things that make the good stories, you know, like
Right.
GameStop and like AMC
Made
and all that
$1 million
stuff.
overnight.
Yeah, yeah. But in terms of like investing, I don't know. I just like the slow and steady approach, because over time I've seen it. Like, I've seen it in my own accounts. Like, I look, I'm like, that's a lot now.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't that big like a few years ago, but now, like, with the compound interest, it's growing. So
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things, like with 401k,
Yeah.
there's like 401k Roth, like there's like different tax advantages of that. So I think you guys should, for sure, if you're working and you don't know if your company offers 401k or not, you definitely need to check it out.
Yeah.
And like what Mike was saying, you got to max it out. So my company, what they do is they match 1% for every 2% that I contribute, up to 3%.
Yeah.
So I contribute 6%
of your salary,
so that I
yeah.
can maximize on how much the company will give me.
Yeah.
And you know, that's free money, and like it helps incentivize me in my savings, because like I have to put in 6% to get the 3% back.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's and you know, like even if like with the whole index talk, that can seem a little intimidating, but most companies, like if you like talk to whoever the 401k provider is, like there are advisors who can, like, based on the level of risk you're comfortable with, they can kind of help you set it out.
Yeah.
Like, so I always do mine. I'm like risk adverse like you.
Yeah.
So I tend to do like the index funds. Like I invest in like the S&P 500.
Yeah. S&P 500. Yeah.
Yeah. That's basically the 500 like big companies. In
Yep.
So it's like, you can't really lose. I mean, of course it can go up and down, but if you look at the trajectory of these things over like 10, 20 years, they're always upward trending.
Right.
So those are kind of really just basic things I think people can look at.
Yeah.
And kind of just start saving. Like, don't let your money just sit there under your mattress.
Right.
Because inflation is gonna get you.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that's like inflation is definitely a factor that you want to think about in 30 years from now. the index funds, S&P 500, there's like sometimes companies will have that as an option, and then they have like mid cap and small cap index, mid cap index, small cap. So those are all like S&P 500 would be like the 500 biggest, and then mid cap would be like the next 2,000 companies, or 800 companies, and then small cap would be like the next 2,000. So it's like, and then total stock market would have like all of them, So the reason why index funds I think are good is like if you look for something called the expense ratio, or like the expense fees, like the lower that is, the better it is, because those are fees that are going to get taken out every year, and like the lower you can pay on those fees, you're going to actually keep more of your own money. And so some fees that are like 1%, that might not sound like a lot, but when you take that 1% over 30 years, that's you paying a lot of money in fees that you don't have to pay. So some like a fee that's like reasonably low, like there are some 0% fees, which are awesome, but like anything that's like 0.05 or 0.1, that's kind of like what I look at when I'm looking at my selection of funds. And so
I want to throw this out there.
Yeah.
If you're like self-employed, or if your company doesn't offer any of these things, you should look into IRAs, individual retirement accounts. Kind of a similar concept, but you're doing it yourself. Like there are a lot of reputable like financial institutions where you can do this with, like Fidelity, Charles Schwab, like any of them. Just go to one of them and look at. It's basically the same thing. You can choose to invest money tax free from your income, or like if you do Roth, then it'll be taxed and it won't be taxed later. But yeah, you can look into something like that, so you can contribute to an account that can grow by yourself without having to do it through your company.
Right.
Yeah.
And the whole reason, like, it's not just to create this big pile of money. Like, I think what that does, it kind of like sets you up to think about life a little differently when money is not the motivating factor, And so there's something called, like, I talked about it on Blair's podcast, but the FIRE movement, it's like financial independence, retire early. Yeah. But some people just think about like, well, I don't want to retire. I want to work, but it would be nice to know I could work at something where it didn't matter how much I made. So like getting to that financial independence number is like another goal that people have. But what you're essentially doing is kind of creating this fund or this pool of money for later in life, so that it'll be there when you do stop working. But along the way, like, you want to be working in something that brings meaning and purpose to your life, And
Absolutely.
so, but that's hard to see when you're in debt and you have a bunch of payments. You're like, I just need a job that's going to pay me the most money, because I got to make all my payments. But at some point, hopefully, like, either something in life happens or God gets a hold of your heart where you're like, I think there's more I can do with my time than just trading it for the biggest paycheck possible, But I think part of that is stewarding what we have and like building somewhat of a nest egg. So it's there for when you do end up stopping working. And then also for me now, I'm starting to think about like, okay, how do I position my children so that they can like enter their working years not like as trust fund babies, because I think that's like a negative, like it kind of implies like laziness or whatever, but more of is like, hey, your basic needs are met, and like you can go do what matters to you and like follow God's call for your life, And so
absolutely, I 100% agree with that. That's my dream for my kids. So we have Aisley and we have a second on the way. If we can, like you were saying, I don't want them to be trust fund babies. Right. I don't want them not have to work. I want them to have enough money where they can choose. They can be picky with what they do for money. They can say, I don't agree with the ethics of this company, so I'm not going to work for them, even though they're going to offer me the most money. Right. Like, I don't need that. I can go somewhere else and I can still be fine. I can chase my passions, my dreams, and be okay. So, And this conversation reminded me of another money lesson that I learned from my dad. I don't know what happened, but I like eavesdropped on his conversation he was having with someone. And I found out that he let someone borrow like a large amount of money, like it was $10,000. And in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy money, right? And it was something about like he couldn't pay him back,
Right.
and my dad saying it's okay, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to my dad saying, why would you? Like,
Yeah.
of course you have to get this back.
Uh-huh.
And he like looked at me very sternly.
Yeah.
And he told me like, if you're gonna let someone borrow money, like don't expect it back.
Right.
Like if it's money that you need to survive,
Yeah.
then you shouldn't be lending it at all.
Right.
But if you have enough money to help someone out,
Yeah.
you should do it gladly.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that, and now it's like I want to be in a place where like all these this whole like investment talk, IRAs, all that.
Yeah.
That's so that I have a nest egg.
Yeah.
So that I don't have to like let someone borrow money and then like have to worry about whether they're gonna pay me back or not.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
want to have that level of financial freedom where
Yeah.
I can be of value
Yeah.
to someone, and yeah, like I don't have to like. There's that level of financial independence.
Yeah.
It's not just. I don't think financial independence is I get to do whatever I want,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also like I can be more of a joyful giver, like
Yeah.
without having to,
Yeah.
like break the bank.
Yeah. I think your dad is like super wise. Like that's so cool that he did that.
Yeah.
I think like, I think maybe he knew going in, like this is really going to be a gift. I'm probably not going to see this money.
Yeah.
But maybe like, maybe when you were a kid, you just saw it as like, you got to get it back, you know? But I do think like that's definitely a healthy approach to money, because otherwise when you create the debtor relationship with money, it can ruin a lot of things, especially with people you know. So if somebody has a need and you can give and meet that need, then you look at it as like a gift, you know, without the expectation of getting it back.
Yeah,
So,
I think the messaging got a little confused because of the whole like debt is a good thing. So I was like, oh, like is this like debt is a good thing too? It's all straightened out now.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like I think I do agree. I think my dad knew going into it that he probably wouldn't see that money.
yeah.
But man, what a like for my dad who was doing well, it's like I can just give it away. But for the person receiving it, like who like when they if it was money that they really needed to like get them out of a hole or to like to alleviate some of like burdens and stress in their lives, like what a gift, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I really look up to my dad in that sense, because I mean I look up to him just overall, but that was a moment of like, wow, like this is definitely a lesson I want to pass down to my kids as well.
Yeah. And so it's like, to me, I'm hearing you talk, and it's like, it's the reminder, like more is caught than taught, you know. He didn't sit you down and say, David, I'm about to give this guy like this, like you just saw him do it, and that was like the nature of his life. And so as you're, there's going to be lessons you can like sit and talk to your kids about, but a lot of it they're just going to pick up on like what you're actually doing, you know. And so that's cool that you got to witness and experience like his actions and him doing that. So,
yeah. And I know Shirley too, she saw like her dad is like super giving as well. And so like I think we both our whole financial like philosophy is like, let's be comfortable so that we don't have to like, so we can be helpful to other people, because like I mean there are people who are like, even if you're not doing well you should be still giving, but I don't know if that's completely biblical, first of all, but also like for us personally, I don't think we can live like that, where we're like going into debt to like give to other people.
Right.
Yeah. So
it could feel like manipulation, or it could just feel like, you know, you kind of have to get your house in order to like actually help somebody else.
Yeah.
So I know what you mean.
Yeah. Well, oh wow, we're at the hour mark. Any last thoughts?
Well, who am I speaking to? Because I have a lot of thoughts.
Anybody and everybody. You can address anybody, everybody.
So I think that what we talked about earlier, like money is taboo. I think that it's taboo for most people, but there are people out there that it's not taboo for, and like listen and learn from those people, because that's kind of what I'm still doing. You know, like at this point in my financial journey. There's other goals I want to hit, and I'm like, okay, who's out there like talking about this stuff? And so I'm still learning, I'm still reading, and I'm still growing and learning, like, okay, what does it mean to be a good steward and like at this level of wealth, you know? How do I make sure like the basics, like my needs are met and like everything else is a want, and how do I make sure I have the right level of wants, you know, and so I'm not going overboard. But I do think there's there's a responsibility now for anybody who heard this. Like, you can't claim ignorance anymore. You can't say I didn't know. Like, now you know there's ways you can do things differently, and so now the ball's in your court. You gotta like actually do something with this knowledge. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing I want to say is like there's gonna come moments in life where you're kind of at a crossroads. You know, like you have to decide: do I go to this school or that school, or do I take this job or this other job, or do I buy this thing? And so typically there's gonna be a debt-free option that doesn't look great, but if you can figure that one out, and if you can identify it, I would encourage you to take that option, because you have no idea what's on the other side of that decision. And so we've talked to like a number of high school students, you know, and you know, a lot of times choices are presented like, well, it's option number 1 that has debt and option number 2 that has more debt. And I'm like, wait, I think there's a third option that has no debt. Like, if you take this one, like, this could be the one that actually sets you up for what you really want, you know? Yeah. And so
on that, I will say choosing to go to Georgia Tech over Emory, those were the 2 schools that I got into, was probably the best decision of my life.
Yeah.
If I would still be in debt if I went to Emory, because it's way more expensive.
Yeah.
But Georgia Tech, I actually went to basically for free, because there was the Hope Scholarship, in-state tuition.
Yeah.
And it was a great decision. And not having student loans, both me and my wife, has given us so many options as a married couple.
Yeah. And so it's like, you're rare, you know, like to be in this position. Yeah. But again, those are the little decisions you make early up, like in life, like 18 years old, and you're like having to make these multi-$100,000 decisions. And so look for the debt-free option. That's what I tell my daughter. She's 6 right now, and I say, Honor, her name is Honor. I'm like, Honor, you're debt-free right now. You and all of your friends, you're all debt-free right now. Like, this is awesome, you know? But some of your friends' parents, they might have debt. Like, I don't know. So like, do what you can to stay debt-free. So these are the conversations I'm having. But it's the same thing, like, as a senior in high school, you're debt-free right now. Like, you are debt-free. Like, if you can remain like that for the next few years, then you have no idea, like, how much of a blessing that's going to be, even though that path might seem a little harder. And so, but then now if you are in debt and like you're trying to work your way out, there are plenty of resources out there to help, but it's on you to, like, you're going to actually have to make some lifestyle changes, and, you know, you're going to have to start making some sacrifices if you want to get out and live in a different way. So, but
man, this is such a good conversation.
Yeah. I had fun. This is awesome.
Thank you so much for coming. And I know I can say this confidently because you said this on Blair's podcast. But if anyone out there wants to connect with Mike,
for sure,
I'll put Mike's email on the descriptions of the podcast, so you can reach out to him. Or I'll link him on the Instagram post as well, so you can reach out to him that way as well. That's how we communicated via Instagram. For sure. So and also, like, I'm not anywhere near Mike and Jean's level, but, you know, I feel like Shirley and we've made some good financial decisions. So if you want to talk to us as well, more than happy to. We won't be as good at resources as Mike is, but we know little things here and there. So I'm more than happy to talk as well. Yeah. So once again, thank you so much.
Thanks,
I think
David.
This conversation is so important, especially for Asian Americans who grew up without the talk of financial literacy in their house. Yeah. And so we were hoping that we talk about this more as a community, and we can pass on this knowledge to our kids as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next time.